Welcome to Ride Success, the podcast that takes you on a learning journey to a more productive, creative, and active life through the power of the bike. In the podcast, I explore cycling's global trends, community needs, innovative business strategies, and the journeys of remarkable individuals in the world of cycling. Today, I am honored to have Erick Cedeño, aka the Bicycle Nomad, a distinguished explorer, historian, and storyteller. Erick embodies the spirit of adventure, seamlessly blending his passion for cycling and a deep commitment to telling historical stories. His remarkable journeys, featured in esteemed publications like Outside Magazine and the New York Times, have earned him a spot in the Explorers Club. Erick's notable expeditions include retracing the Underground Railroad, the route of enslaved African Americans to Canada, and the 1897 Buffalo Soldiers route where a group of African American soldiers used bicycles to traverse the country. These bikepacking adventures are just some of the many that Erick has taken part in, which take us in an immersive historical experience. So join me in this learning journey as we delve into Erick's inspiring work and his mission to celebrate history while fostering inclusivity and empowerment in the cycling community. But before we get into the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, please remember to follow the podcast wherever you listen to it. It helps us to grow it, bring you amazing guests, and take you on this learning journey. Now, back to the podcast. Welcome, Erick, to Ride Success. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here, Pedro. Thank you again.
I'm interested to have this conversation because your work exists within an intersection that I find very curious and interesting, which is an intersection between cycling, history, and social justice. And I don't think there is other people doing this, the work that you're doing. And I wanted to start our conversation by framing it and quoting something you said on one of your keynote speeches at Explorers Club in New York, I believe. And it goes like this: "We have the responsibility to not just enjoy the outdoors, but to acknowledge those who inspired us and came before us." And that's your quote. But then you go on to say, "You die twice, once when you physically die, and a second time when no one speaks your name." Now, I found this very profound and really stopped me in my tracks because it's so telling about the purpose that you have. So with this, for the people that don't know you, I want you to give us a bit of context and take us back, if you will, for us to understand what motivates you, what inspires you to retracing in your bikepacking adventures these historical routes such as the Underground Railroad, the paths of the Buffalo Soldiers. So what drives you to select these specific routes? And how do you prepare to ensure that these experiences are both enriching for yourself, but also respectful for the people that came before you and of their historical significance?
There's many layers to these questions, and this particular question has so many layers. And I'll start with when I was 12 years old, my mom took me on a trip to Mexico. 12 years old. She took me on a trip to see the pyramids and the temples of Mayan and Aztec civilization. That particular trip, and we had a guided historian for 2 weeks. At 12 years old, I was climbing pyramids of ancient civilization, going through walls of ancient civilization, and it changed me. It is who I am because of that experience, though. My first trip, my first bikepacking trip, my first longest trip was from Vancouver, Canada to Tijuana, Mexico, along the Pacific Coast Highway. And what I kept seeing was whales, dolphins along the way, and just taking the time for myself to be with myself. But that trip was physically challenged for me. There was a lot of climbing, and where I lived at the time was Miami, which is very flat. But I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to see more. I wanted to see the landscape of this country. So the following year, in 2011, I went from Miami to New York City. On that particular trip, I went through like St. Augustine, Florida, and I kept seeing historical markers in Savannah, Georgia. I see historical markers in Charleston, South Carolina, in Jamestown, Virginia, in Washington, D.C., and Delaware, all the way up to when I got to New York City. And on that particular trip, I just fell in love with traveling through history, right? And I said to myself, why don't I just combine both of my loves, which is bikepacking, traveling by bicycle, and history. And the history became kind of my carrot. Is when things get really hard along the route, I just can't wait to learn more, right? I can't wait till I get to the next city to discover more, to learn more about a particular story or history that I'm following. In 2000, I decided to travel from New Orleans to Canada to learn more and to pay homage to a particular route and history of the United States called the Underground Railroad, and I'm just so fascinated with the resilience of people traveling for freedom, right?
Exactly.
So I just thought, I'm going to find out a particular route that I was interested in traveling. And I did it in 2014. And I went back in 2020 because there's so much history along the route, along the Underground Railroad, which is many routes in the United States where people were traveling, enslaved Africans were traveling for their freedom to Canada. But there was also a route that went to Mexico. But I've traveled to Canada on that route twice. In 2013 or in 2014, I started asking myself a question. I was like, who were the first people that traveled by bike? Where did they go and why did they go, right? Just because I love history, I wanted to learn more about the history of bikepacking and traveling by bike. I found out a lot in the 1890s. There was a lot of people traveling the world, the country by bicycle. Many in the late 1890s, one person, two people team. But then I saw a picture of 20 black soldiers traveling by bike. And I was like, it was like finding gold for me because it was for the first time that I saw someone that looked like me doing something that I truly enjoy doing and I have a passion for. And immediately I felt cheated, right? I was like, how come I never knew about these guys?
Oh.
Right? Like, because I started traveling by bike when I was 32 years old. But if I would have learned this in high school or in college, maybe I would have started before because I would have seen someone that looked like me doing something that I would have loved to try out. And that's why that particular project of the Bicycle Corps became such a personal project for me. Because I thought I want to inspire. It's not my story, it's their story. And they inspire me to, I got a sense of pride that I was like, if I share this story, maybe more people that look like me, or maybe don't look like me, will start riding their bikes. And maybe I inspire the next generation of bikepackers, or maybe the next generation of historians. And that's why I did it.
There is something that you said, and I find it kind of relevant here, is that I think I need to unpack a bit more the reason, you wanting to explore. So perhaps I want to take a few steps back and kind of go to the why, or why you wanted to start bikepacking or cycling. Because through my research, I found this particularly writing. You said, I belong in the outdoors. My tours, my backpacking trips are like taking oxygen for myself. So, and then you go on to say, so that I can can be a better husband, a better father, a better son, and kind of better member of the community. So I was like, wow. So you taking really a step back and really kind of knowing yourself and understanding there is more to just riding the bike. There is an importance of growing in myself and feeling at peace, perhaps. So I wanted you to tell me a bit more about that why, and kind of elaborate on that, if you will.
Yeah, early on when I remember I was in a university at college. I remember telling myself, all I want to do is be a better person. And I don't know. And I remember talking to myself, I don't know how do I accomplish that, but all I want to do is be a better person. And that question came because when we were graduating, I had a lot of my friends who were like, oh, I can't wait till I get a job and climb the ladder, the corporate ladder, and have a family and buy a house. And they had so many dreams, which it was their journey, right? And became overwhelmed. I was like, whoa, all I want to be is a better person. And that was it. That has been my mission since I was like 21, 22, when I asked myself, how do I get there? And it's so interesting because it took many years for me to get there and to find this lifestyle of bikepacking, of traveling by bike. And that's why 99.9% of the time I travel by myself, because I'm usually surrounded with people, right? And responsibilities and things like that.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to take time for myself. And I found after that first trip that I was able to find a lot of the questions that I had for myself. And also taking that time to be by myself, to find what the future will be for me, right? What's the next 5 years going to be? What's the next 10 years? How do I want to live this life? I lost my mom, and I told you early on that my mom, I think I had the perfect mom, because I don't know if another woman would have been able to handle my spirit. And I say that because the person I am today, I was very curious as a kid as well, but she was able to like guide me. And just like that trip that we took to Mexico, my mom was very important in my life, but I lost my mom when I was 19 years old. I was a freshman in college, and I didn't know how to grieve, and I don't think my dad knew how to grieve, right? So I just continued my life without someone telling me what to do after losing someone early on. And taking the time for myself to be on a bicycle has been almost therapeutic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's often. I mean, that is often what a lot of people say. That perhaps the movement of the bicycle helps to unlock the brain or the mind, and takes you to be in the present, not have to worry about the future or the past, but just be in the present. And that's especially in the nowadays, with everything trying to grab your attention, is so difficult to do. I mean, there is also kind of, you have been on this journey and you found that through bikepacking. How, I'm just curious to understand, is like, there must be, you mentioned the death of your mother, which is, it's a very pivotal moment in your life. Is the bike, do you start going on these adventures, kind of, you start thinking, I can go longer, I can go harder? What is the evolution of you as a young person, up to now, up to this kind of multi-day backpacking adventures, crisscrossing the country?
Honestly, I don't know who I would have been without going on these long trips, right? I've always thought I was going out to have an adventure, to see the landscape of the country. But later on, I discovered that it was more of an internal navigation, an internal exploration of myself that I was doing. And every time I go out and I come back a different person. And that's why I always said, like, I come back a better husband, I come back a better father, a better member of my community, because now I've taken the time for myself to, like, what should I do? How do I become a better family person? How do I provide for my family? All those questions that I have are really hard to answer while I am surrounded constantly by noises, by people, by social media. But when I silence myself, when I go out and my mind just like you mentioned, goes in the present moment. And yes, sometimes I think about the future. Sometimes I think about the past, but I don't dwell on those moments. I just stay in the present. It is a lifestyle that I will continues to gravitate, like, hey, go out. Even if I go out for a 1-day trip somewhere and I camp out and then come back, I gain something out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of, it enriches you, your soul, your mind, those ventures.
You called it out. And I said it that, with food, I feed my stomach, right? I feed my body with food. But with these experiences, I feed my soul. And yeah, I don't know how else to feed my soul, but by having these experiences, and I enjoy doing it by myself. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also an aspect of that, because the historical significance of these routes is not just Erick, aka the bicycle nomad, going on an adventure and off he goes and we'll see you in 3 months' time. There's so much more to this. I wanted to unpack that, because the starting point was kind of a very layered question, so we need to unpack it. First of all, I wanted trying to understand, besides I guess, these uncovering these stories that you are telling, is there like a personal sign for you to go on as adventures and retell and bring up, for instance, the Buffalo Soldier, or that kind of things that, as you mentioned, kind of are forgotten?
Yes, they became personal to me for many reasons. As a person of color, I did not see myself centered on this lifestyle that I love, right? This lifestyle that I have so much passion for, which is traveling by bike. I didn't need it because my mom always said, hey, you could be whoever you want to be, right? But I thought there could be a kid out there, again, that looks like me or may not look like me, that may need this inspiration. But as I went through the history and started diving into the history of the bikepackers, of what I call the original bikepackers, the bicycle corps, I started discovering, like, many, many, many things that I was like, well, that's not fair, right? And I'll tell you a few of them. So I had all these photos of the 1896, 1897 expedition that they did. On the 1897 expedition, there were 20 soldiers that went from Missoula, Montana to St. Louis, Missouri, 1,900 miles, 41 days. I had all these photos, but I couldn't figure out who was who, right? I knew the leader of the expedition, the white soldier. His name was Lieutenant James Moss. I knew everything about him. I knew where he was born. I knew where he went to school. I know where he died. I know how he died. I mean, I just knew so much about him, but I didn't know about his soldiers, right? The bicycle corps, the guys that looked like me. How come I didn't know where they were born or where they died? And the saddest part was I couldn't name any of them on the photo by face and name. And and that, Pedro, was very sad to me, right? Because no one, and when I say no one, is able to name their face and name the face with the name, I was like, potentially that's somebody's great great grandfather, if that was my great great grandfather, I want the world to know how awesome he was.
Exactly. Yeah.
And especially me as a bikepacker, like I have so much passion for this lifestyle that it's like, if that was my ancestor, if that was my great grandfather, I want the world to know how awesome he was. So I took this project almost like they were my family. And again, I know how much pride I have because of them. And I wanted someone out there to have the same pride that I had. So again, I started researching as much as I could about the bicycle core. 3 years ago, I started working with a historian, and we're able to name 9 of them out of 20. So there's 11 soldiers that we don't know who they are, but we're still working on that.
Still working.
Another thing that we discovered is that now we know where each of them was born and where each of them died. We also know where each of them is buried. And some of them were buried without a grave marker. And
yeah.
And I just thought that was sad too. We have to give them the dignity that was not given to them while they were alive. And that is why that quote of "you die twice," right? That is an ancient Egyptian proverb that says you die twice. One, when you physically die, and the second time when no one mentioned your name. And after reading that quote, it was just like doing this project was like puzzle pieces. It started coming along. Like, this person is this person, and
you can start putting together the pieces of how these stories relate to each other.
I became fascinated with this story in 2013, 2014, and then I said, one day I want to retrace that route, similar to how I did the Underground Railroad, but I didn't have enough information until 2021, when a friend of mine asked me, like, hey, what are you doing in 2022? Right? This was a year before my ride in 2022. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I would love to retrace the route of the bicycle corps that they did in 1897, but I want to do it as historically as possible. And he said, you should. So I asked my wife, I was like, hey, you think I could do this project? She knows how much I have put into this story, right? Into this history. I mean, even before I finished telling her, she was like, you must tell that story. As a Black woman, I would love for you to give them the dignity, but also tell their legacy, right? So it was important for her as well. And
exactly, yeah.
And in 2020, 125 years later from the original expedition, I already had journals as well. So I knew when they started, which was June 14 of 1897. So June 4th of 2022, 125 years later, at the same time, 5:30 a.m., I left from the same point they left, and I started tracking their miles day by day.
That's and that work that you have started through your initial research into 2013, all the way to making it happen in 2022, it still carries on, that project, because you're still working on it to give the dignity give a gravestone to the soldiers that have not yet been identified. How far have you come along in that process of identifying all of the Buffalo soldiers?
Yes, so in the 1896, so there was 3 trips that they took. The first trip from Fort Missoula, Montana to Lake McDonald. Today it's called McDonald Lake, but back then it was called Lake McDonald. The round trip expedition was 130 miles. And around August 15, about a week and a half later, they went from Missoula, Montana to Yellowstone. And within Yellowstone Park, National Park, they rode about 200 miles and then back. That trip was documented, that was about 800 miles. And then in 1897 was the expedition that I did, which is from Montana to St. Louis, Missouri. So there's a lot of things that we're still trying to figure out. So in 1896, I could name everyone from face and name of who participated. There was about 9 soldiers on that one. On the 1897, for some reason, it wasn't documented by face and name. So we are able to recognize right now, today, 9 of them with face and name, right? There's 11 of them that I don't know who they are. That we have the names, so we can put what face goes with what name. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And, for me, sometimes I do this podcast and people ask me, "Well, what's your next project?" I have many projects in my head for 5 lifetimes, but this project, I cannot move forward until I'm able to recognize all of them by face and name. If I move on to the next project, it takes more of my time and I dive all the way in, that project becomes almost secondary. And I cannot move forward, right? Like, these guys are literally my heroes. And how can I tell the story to my son of who my heroes are if I can't even name who they are, right? Like, I have photos and sometimes people ask me, like, who is that person? I don't know, right? And I cannot move forward because for 125 years, no one has done that job. And again, for me, this job has always been about giving them the dignity that they deserve. I think they're pioneers of a lifestyle that I have a passion for, that I love, that I hopefully could pass down to my son, right? So I cannot move forward until that is done. But right now, we know 9 of them and still working on the next 11 guys.
It sounds like you became like fascinated with them, and they have kind of inspired you. So it's only fair that you give them the dignity of recognizing them. Like I said, it's like giving them the gravestone that they deserve, that they don't have, and also all the merits that comes with them trailblazing, if you will, using the bicycle to traverse kind of the country in kind of arid conditions. If you can imagine a bicycle in 125 years ago, one single speed, heavy loaded as well, with all the
1896 expedition was wooden wheels.
Oh God.
On the 1887, they changed that because they were going through many different seasons and they realized that they had to change it to steel. But I am truly fascinated with the history. It's probably my life work because there's so much stuff that I have questions and don't have answers. My wife calls it like I'm obsessed with this story, and truly, maybe I am. Maybe I am.
I mean, it's the story is inspirational in itself. Through the search and the people that you've connected. I mean, through these 9 soldiers that you have identified. What is it like connecting with their relatives? What is it like? Because it's kind of, I can't quite comprehend. But please share, like, what is the experience of?
Yeah, you can only imagine if you have a hero, right? And if you have a hero that is no longer living, and then all of a sudden you know so much about them, and all of a sudden the closest you could get to your hero is by meeting one of their descendants. That's what it feels like. Just put yourself in that position. For me, it's overwhelming every time I meet one of them, right? Like, there's a film called Truth and Dignity. It's on YouTube. You could type in Truth and Dignity, and it's a 7-minute short. And why I mentioned that short is because at the end, I'm hugging a lady who is one of the descendants of the Bicycle Corps. His name is Sergeant Mingo Sanders, who was the oldest rider of the Bicycle Corps. He was 39 years old at the time of that expedition. Without him, I don't think they would have been able to to make history. He was a leader of that expedition, and I got to meet the grandniece of Mingo Sanders,
Wow.
and that was emotional for me. I teared up, and I wasn't tearing up before that, but all of a sudden I was introduced to her and was told who she was, and again, it's the closest I'm able to get to some of these guys that I know so much. For me, was I wanted to know everything about them. I wanted to know their personality. I wanted to know were they married, did they have kids. So knowing all that and all of a sudden meeting one of their descendants is pretty awesome.
It's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. You just I can't imagine how it would be like, but from what he's saying is, it's just you're almost feels like you're giving them back something that they may have lost along the way, but it's like you are in a sense reviving the history through the work, through the research you put in, through retracing their steps and retelling their stories, through the different diary entries, but also through the newspaper clippings and the photographs. Is a way of kind of reliving history, if you will.
Yeah, for me also, Pedro, is like we celebrate of history, right? Like pioneers of like the first person that went to the moon, the first person that climbed Mount Everest. We celebrate those, people that were first president of countries and things like that. And for me, I wanted to have that celebration for these guys. For me, they're pioneers of the outdoor industry, of cycling industry, of bikepacking history, U.S. history. That I just like, more people should know about these guys and celebrate them as much as I'm celebrating them. And that's my passion, to always telling their story. Again, it's not my story, it's their story. And every time I have time to share that, I like to do.
Yeah. I mean, and there's also the aspect of as well of sharing a bit of the African American culture heritage, because it's a very particular part of the history that you are showcasing and putting again into the world, because it has been somehow forgotten. So it's very important as well to bring that again to the limelight, and to 100%. Showcase that there was injustice and discrimination put upon those explorers, the soldiers that took on this challenge.
100%. On the other side of the coin, also, is like when I got into this lifestyle of bikepacking, traveling by bike, all I saw people that did not look like me traveling by bike. And like people were saying, where did mountain biking started? Right. And, there's many theory of where mountain biking started, right? Some people say in Marin County, which is Northern California and all that. But I'm like, no, these guys started mountain biking, right? So it was like there's an injustice of the history of like mountain bike, bikepacking, that, it's African American history, but it's like, it's bigger than that, right? And how come sometimes some of those narratives are not told, right? Because, and I found it, like I mentioned early on, I felt cheated, right? I could have started traveling by bike if I would have seen someone that looked like me. I was like, luckily now there's more people of color traveling by bike. There's people of color mountain biking and things like that. But if that story would have been told before, right? How many more people we would have
exactly
traveling? So that's what I mentioned, like by the injustice, right? Like of not telling the story. But it's about celebrating.
Precisely. It's just it always comes back with the historical events, comes back to how the history is portrayed and the interest that are in. More often than not, the minorities are or are sidelined. And it's, again, as from the experience that you had, it's important to have these stories being told, to have the role models, as you mentioned, for your son, because, and for the future generations, because that it shows that, hold on, there's these people that have done amazing things, and we need to know about this. This needs to be told. I wanted to try and understand in what ways are you inspiring the younger generation to take up cycling, to do more bikepacking adventures like you are doing?
Yeah, by telling these kind of stories. In the future, would love to create some type of like bicycle nomad camp where I could take kids from underprivileged or communities that are experiencing inequality. Would love to take them out on bikepacking trips to see that their world is bigger than where they live, right? And you could inspire someone, a kid that travel by bicycle and use their human power, and how much that inspires someone, right? Like to know that, like someone asked me, like, what have you learned about yourself? And one of the answers that I always say is like, I have learned how strong I am, right? Because of the challenges that you go through when you bikepacking, and you're like, damn, I went through that. And if you could
Exactly.
do that now as an adult, imagine the power that that will create to a kid, right? To say, I was able to do that, right? And you
Yeah.
go through those challenges, and they create character. So in the future, I would love to create that. I'm not there yet, but that has been always a dream, to create like a bicycle nomad camp.
You talk about the kind of working with underprivileged youth communities, also to help them, inspire them, empower them to see the benefits of riding. Do you see the role of cycling kind of as a vehicle to address societal changes? For instance, in America.
Yeah, so interesting, because when you're on a bike, there's no judgment, right? Like, you're not black, you're not white, you're not brown, you're just a cyclist.
Yeah.
It's only when you get off the bike that you start judging people. But when you're on the bike, you're just a cyclist. And I've always wondered, how do we stay on the bike? How do we stay on the bike to not have those judgment, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the bicycle definitely brings people together. Is definitely a great leveler. You can have chats with people that you don't know from anywhere, but the through riding a bike, it brings you together. Whether it is people from different ethnicity, from different cultures, even languages, that you can just by riding a bike and not speak the language of someone else, but you're riding it, sharing that moment with other person, and there's a connection there that you establish, that even if the language is a barrier. So how do we get more people to spend more time riding bikes? That is the, I guess, a key question. Let's draw from a bit from your experience growing up. Was the bike a way for you to explore and go on adventures and then meet friends?
Yeah, I mean, like, it's the ultimate freedom machine that we all grow up having, right? Like, so when I have my bike, I didn't depend on my mom or my dad to take me to the swimming pool, right? I would just get on my bike and I go to the swimming pool, and then I would go to the basketball court, or I would go see my cousins, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But the other side is that it gives my family, or my mom or my dad, as a kid, it gives them freedom too. So they're not tied in, right? So it's the ultimate freedom machine, right? So, but what we need is better infrastructure, right? Like I wasn't an advocate per se, because all I needed was you give me a small shoulder for me to travel on the road and I'm okay. But then when I became a husband and a father, I was like, whoa, this is not safe.
Exactly.
Right. And how do we make biking safer for our families to return back? Right. So
Exactly. Yeah.
that's, I think one of the questions that you had, how do we get more people on bikes, is like people have to feel safe. And right now, some people don't feel safe. Yeah, there's some communities that have a good infrastructure, but what about the communities that are experiencing inequality? Like, how come
Of course.
there's no safe infrastructure? And that's how we get more people on the bike for them to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
But then also, I was not making enough money after college, and I was like, how do I save money for me to travel? So I sold my car and I commuted by bicycle, and just moved around by bicycle. I was able to save money from like not paying insurance or maintenance and those kind of things. So again, the bicycle again becomes kind of like a freedom machine. When I was an adult, right, I was able to save money. And I always say that the bicycle makes you feel big when you're small, and then when you're big, it makes you feel small. If you understand what I mean.
Good.
Yeah, it's like, again,
I think so. Yeah. In the sense that I guess it gives you the freedom. Like, so as a small person, it gives you the freedom to explore, get out of the kind of the control of your parents, if you will.
Yeah.
But also, if you are big, kind of brings you down a peg and just puts you in more in contact with nature, puts you in contact with other people in the community. That's my take.
And also, 100%, you got it. And also, you think about when you were a kid, you had no limitations. Sometimes when we grow as an adult, and that's what I mean by being big, we start having all this limitation. But when you're on a bike and it start raining, sometimes depending on the visibility, I continue to bike and it makes me feel like a kid, right? And some people are like, oh my God, you bike through the rain? I'm like, yeah, I used to do it when I was a kid. What's the difference now? You see what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you must have so many stories from your backpacking adventures. Is there every day you are out there riding, come rain or shine, and you're facing adversity. But I guess there is that kind of, the power of the history, the power of the role models, the kind of these heroes that you're looking up to that kind of propel you on and forward. Is there something that kind of perhaps a mantra or something that when you are facing a storm or a difficult moment on the bike, when you have a puncture, and is there something that kind of you come back to propel you forward?
Yeah, I love that question, because on that last trip in 2022, and I said the last trip is because potentially this August, I am going to retrace the second expedition that was going from Missoula, Montana to Yellowstone. So I want to go exactly where they went, especially focusing on the national park. I want to know exactly where they went and the route they took. So to go back in 2022, when I retraced that route, there were so many moments early on that I was like, wow, this is hard. And listen, I have experience of traveling by bike, but that trip was hard for me. There was a lot of elevation. The terrain was hard. That there was a couple of times early on that I was like, man, if I wasn't retracing a historical route, I probably would have given up and would have gone home. But the thing that kept me going, Pedro, was I'm paying homage to my heroes. I'm paying homage to history. I'm telling history. I'm doing history. So there's no way I could give up. But I also know how bikepacking works. There's a lot of places where you feel high because you're like excited, and you're like, but you also know that eventually there's going to be some lows. So, and bikepacking is similar to life, because you can't go too high, you can't go too low, and you gotta. And when I said you can't go high or you can't go low, it's like, yeah, you could celebrate some of those, but not dwell on them, right? Not dwell on the lows, not dwell on the highs. And it's similar to life, that there's times when I'm riding at night, and I try to get off the road around 5:30. So I want to be in my camp and all that stuff. Around 5:36, I still want to have some sunlight. There's been times where I'm like riding my bike and it's still 9:30 at night and I haven't reached my campsite. But what experiences have told me is that, okay, I have been here before, right? So just chill. And sometimes I'm talking to myself to just relax, that, not physically, I haven't been here, but I've been in the moment of traveling by night, that I'm like, I need to chill. I know how to handle that. And yeah, so those are the things I tell myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good metaphor for life. You just understand that the highs, there will come lows with it, but it's just finding that the rhythm and being able to know that there is something besides the pain or the misfortune, that whatever is happening at the moment, in like kind of thinking forward, I think.
100%. I have a story to tell you. In 2010, 2011, when I first started traveling by bike, I met this guy who told me, if you ever break, let's say, your chain, if you have a flat tire, if you lose your wallet, if you fall off your bike, and that's the worst thing that happened to you that day, then your life is good. And I was like, I don't understand. He says, you're doing something that you have a passion for and that you are enjoying. So if that's the worst thing that happened to you, you're good. And I later understood that he was telling me that because his ex-partner, his ex-wife, was ill. 3 months later, after he told me that, she passed away.
Dear.
So he was telling me a life metaphor, right? And if that's the worst thing that happened to you, you're enjoying life, you're still alive, keep going. And I've always stayed with that message of like, sometimes we have a flat tire, and the flat tire never happens early on. It happens when you're really tired at the end of the day, right? And I remember what that guy told me 15, 14 years ago, says, if that's the worst thing that this happened, life is good.
Your life is good. Yeah, there's I think it touches upon if you have someone that loves you and that you love back, family, friends, that is, it can't be bad. There's always something to look forward to. A small hiccup on an adventure, it will be much less kind of event than what it means to have someone that loves you and loves you back.
And one of the things people always ask me, like, what are 5 things that you always have to take when you go bikepacking? And one of the things I've always taken since the beginning of time when I started traveling by bike is a picture of a loved one. Usually my mom, my dad, my brothers. Yeah. Right now I'm taking a picture of my wife and my son. I always take it with me to remind me exactly what you say. When I go back, I have to stay safe because I have some loved ones that are waiting for me, right? So I'm always taking a picture of my loved ones because I want that reminder that I have to stay safe and that I have some loved ones waiting for me to get back home safe. So
Yeah. I wanted to, yes, it's so important to reflect on that. I wanted to kind of bring it to now to the, I think we perhaps have touched upon this throughout our conversation, but is a topical question on the podcast, which must be asked. What does success look like to you?
Such a good question. For me, success looks like when you're able to own your time, when you're able to balance your time. For me, that's what it means. Like today, I'm able to do what I love, right?
Yeah.
I'm following my passion, and I'm able to share with my family. And that balance, such a great question, because now I understand that once you follow your passion, you become the best version of yourself.
Very
And
true.
and the people that surround you, either your family, your community, benefits from that. I've been very lucky. I feel blessed that I've been able to figure that out. And that what success looks like to me. When you're able to follow your passion, you're able to manage your time.
Very good. Once you know that, what's your purpose and how do you want to live your life? It's everything else kind of, you become laser focused on that, and everything else becomes secondary, and you get much more enjoyment with that through whatever you're doing. And like you said, you become the best version of yourself.
Yeah, and you're only able to, I think I was only able to discover that through spending time with myself in nature, spending time on myself on the bike. That you know, in 2014, my older brother asked me, like, how come you're always biking? How come you're always camping? Like, you have a college degree. Why don't you get a job, a corporate job, and you'll make a lot of money? And I didn't have an answer for him. I was like, whoa, I don't know. I had to pause, and the only one back then was like, I'm following my heart. I knew that it felt right what I was doing. You know, now fast forward 2014, 10 years later from that question has always stayed in my head. I have a different answer for him, and he sees what my life has turned out to be, where I was just following passion, but today my passion has become my livelihood.
Of course, yeah.
And it intertwined, right? Like bikepacking and traveling through history, and now being hired to do lectures and things like that. That I didn't know that back in 2014 why I was doing that, but I was just it felt right for me, right? So.
There is the five senses, and then there is the last sense, the intuition. You need to, I guess, you need to be in touch with it as well.
100%, Pedro. And another thing is everybody's journey is different. I'm not saying that my journey needs to be your journey or your journey needs to be my journey. I'm just saying that what I'm doing
Of course, yeah.
is good, and someone else may look differently, right? So,
of course, yeah, exactly, yeah. So I wanted to kind of bring our conversation to my last question, which is a tradition I started on a podcast where every guest leaves a question to my next guest, not knowing who they are. And I think this question, it's very interesting to you because you work in the intersection of cycling, history, and social justice. So it is quite relevant. The question is this: what are you actively doing to improve diversity and inclusivity within cycling?
yeah, for me as a storyteller, is telling the story of history, of bikepacking history that started in the late 1890s, right? Where there were people that looked like me traveling by bicycle. And I enjoy it. I enjoy telling the story because it inspires people. Again, people that look like me or may not look like me to discover what the landscape looks like, to learn about history. And I get a lot of messages on emails and on my social media and how much people were inspired by learning about the history of what I call the original bikepackers, which is the bicycle court. So that is what I'm doing to create diversity in cycling.
Adding to what you said, it's very vital that those stories are told so that African American youth, teenagers can look up and see role models that their fathers, their grandfathers didn't have, perhaps.
And also on the other side of that coin, Pedro, is that just because they were Black, they don't need to just be celebrated by people of color or by Black people. White people could celebrate this history as well, right? So hopefully I could inspire. And that's why I keep saying people that look like me or may not look like me, because my hope is that everyone is inspired by these guys, right? So
yeah. I mean, that's if I didn't make that clear in the beginning of the podcast, that's also why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I felt inspired as well by the story you told. And I first heard of you 3 years ago, and I've been following your journey kind of on and off. And so the reason I found you is because of the Buffalo Soldiers. It's because the story, how you told the story. So you know, that's I am the example, if you will.
Thank
you. So following the tradition of the podcast, now is your turn to leave a question to my next guest. What question would you like to leave to them?
How are they making biking, cycling safer for everyone to enjoy?
Very good. Yes. That's a very good question, and I'm sure there will be a great answer as well from my next guest.
Can't wait to hear the answer.
Erick. Yes, yeah. Erick, it has been a pleasure to get to know you a bit more and really understand kind of the purpose and the vision that you have. And I look forward to hearing more about the Bicycle Nomad summer camp when that comes to fruition.
Pedro, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for your interest, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
What a wonderful experience talking with Erick. His work is a powerful blend of adventure, history, and advocacy. Through Bicycle Nomad, he is not only preserving the past, but also inspiring a future generation of cyclists and historians. His journeys remind me, and hopefully you as well, that the road to success is not just about reaching a destination, but also the story we collect and the lives we touch along the way. If you have listened this far into the podcast, please remember to leave us a review. 5-star review would be great. And tune in to next week's podcast, where my next guest will answer Erick's question. Until then, thanks for listening.